Honourable Member for Bass, Ms Finlay.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise this evening to make my contribution on the report back for the Minister for Primary Industries Water, the Honourable Joe Palmer, MLC, and given the broad-ranging responsibilities in Minister Palmer's portfolio area, there were a lot of questions and things discussed. The report back dot points as an example through agriculture, education, training, housing, labour shortages, biosecurity, salmon fisheries, impacts on small business, oysters, rock lobster, shearing, ports and shipping, irrigation, water entitlements, river health, fish farm regulation, feral deer and animal welfare. And it is such a big portfolio area with broad-ranging responsibilities and areas where there's an expectations that ministers are both across their responsibilities but also in a position to respond to different questions that are asked. And it was quite frustrating in the session where questions would be asked that would have particular impacts and direct impacts on farmers across Tasmania, but the answer would be, that's for another minister, that's for another minister. And I think where there is a minister that has responsibility for an area and people in their portfolio areas are going to be directly impacted by something, then a minister should be able to make contributions in that area. And I will go through some of the exchanges that we had at some point to illustrate that. But, for instance, the inability of farmers in regional and rural areas to secure and develop housing in order to home people that they need to have work on their farms. There is such a critical issue in labour shortage in Tasmania, and I know it's not just an issue for Tasmania, but in the event that a farmer gets a great person and a person that wants to contribute and be part of this industry and wants to work for a farmer, then if they can't find them somewhere to live, they can't actually take on that person. And it's a real impact to productivity, and it's a real impact towards the government's own sort of vision for the sector that, you know, the farm gate value will be $10 billion by 2050. Farmers won't be able to actually support getting to that if they are constrained in their productivity because they can't house people in rural and regional Tasmania. It's a really big issue. Another issue, particularly for the islands, for King Island and Flinders Island, is being able to get their agricultural products but also the needs for their farms on and off island, and the shipping challenges for both islands are major problems for those areas, issues that have been raised repeatedly, and requires a laser focused effort from the Minister to support primary producers on both of the islands. But again, not my responsibility, that's someone else's responsibility. And when asked, well, what are you doing on behalf of farmers to advocate for these issues, whether it be for housing, whether it be for shipping and port challenges, oh, you know, I'm listening and I'm talking. The time for listening and talking for this government, I think, is over. What this government say they do is, you know, deliver, but what we actually know is that actually not even very good at the listening side of it, but the delivery also not so good. And the Tasmanian people are expecting now that action is taken on these things, and through the persistency with the questions, it's not about what are you listening to, but it's what are you actually doing for farmers in these areas. One of the other areas which has a direct and real impact on farmers in Tasmania is skills and training. There's a real concern from farmers and from the TFGA that the training, for instance, say with TAFE, isn't fit for purpose for a young person to actually come out of a course and actually go on to land and safely actually support operations on a farm. And that in TAFE experience for young people needs to be positive, so they see career in primary industries as a positive option. But if the training isn't fit for purpose and if the delivery actually isn't industry specific, then it's almost doing the opposite and undermining the opportunities and undermining the reputation and the mindset of young people to see it as what it is, which is a fantastic career opportunity. Now, I just wanted to go through some of the exchanges that we had on a number of issues that are really important, and my biggest takeaway from this exchange was, why is everything so hard and why do things take so long and why is direct action not taken? But as I mentioned, often there's a deferral to someone else's. I opened up with questions around the impact on farmers about transmission line infrastructure. This has been a conversation that's been going on for a really long period of time. It's been projects in Tasmania that we've known have been coming for a really long period of time, but the legislation around, say, compulsory acquisition for farmers is so antiquated that it doesn't recognise contemporary approaches to compensation, contemporary approaches to acquisition of land that would actually serve farmers positively and be a positive engagement with farmers. And what they feel is, with the infrastructure that's being developed along the northwest transmission lines, is that they're just second class, secondary to the needs of Tasmania with energy infrastructure. And when the Minister was asked questions on this, it's like, that's not my responsibility, that's for the Minister for Energy. And again, farmers don't see it that way. Farmers say that they have an Ag Minister and they want the Ag Minister to actually be participating actively within these opportunities, engagements for them. I raised the issue around TAFE again that was referred to the Skills and Training Minister, and I did raise these issues with the other ministers in their portfolio areas, but farmers would expect that the Ag Minister actually acts on their behalf. One of the other issues that I raised was the concern of farmers around shearing schools. For a number of years there's been a really successful program delivered around shearing schools in Tasmania because there's a massive shearing shortage. There's a $277 million sector at risk because of the inability for people to secure, when they need it, shearers on their properties. And there has been about 12 months worth of exchanges between shearers, peak bodies and the government about being able to provide continued investment in these shearing schools in Tasmania. And my question is, why does it take questioning at scrutiny, questioning at estimates to actually get an outcome for farmers? I had with me a year's worth of correspondence and attempts of phone calls and meetings for the peak body and shearing representatives to meet with the government to secure just a meeting to discuss what they needed in terms of getting funding for this. And it just took persistent peppering of questioning across the table and eyeballing someone to say, will you meet with them? And as a result of that, for the first time, they got to meet with them Thursday last week. Now, it feels like maybe there's a positive outcome, but they ask and I ask, why does it take that? Why is this government not proactive enough to go, there's a problem here, there's a shortage, we should be able to find a solution to this, let's get the right people around the table and have a positive conversation. One of the other areas of concern I've raised, the shipping and port infrastructure challenges. That's something that continues to frustrate, and particularly, yes, it frustrates people on Flinders Island, but when I was visiting King Island recently, the frustration of how people on King Island feel like they're not being treated like other regular Tasmanians, where someone who might want to ship north to mainland Australia are not treated the same way as someone who wants to ship from mainland Tasmania. We should be able to go north or south, and the services shouldn't be impeded by a lack of appropriate competition. And I think the providers, the government needs to sit down and talk to the providers and talk to farmers about solutions that needs to be made in that area. One of the other areas that I asked questions on was on behalf of our oyster sector. There has been, again, long time. When I say long time, I don't mean just months, I mean years. There's been a long-term challenge for our oyster growers around being able to get approvals for their depuration tanks. Now, there were some answers provided at estimates, which has been handed back to the peak body and oyster growers in Tasmania. There's been some questions about some of the answers provided, but it appears as though at face value there has been progress made. But again, why does it take intervention and persistent questioning from opposition and other parties to actually get action? It feels like not just in primary industries, not just in budget and estimates, but the only reason why this government act is if they feel uncomfortable to the point where they're getting so many questions and so much pressure they think, oh, maybe we have to take action. Wouldn't it be fantastic if we lived in an environment where the government were proactive and took action to address these issues before they became political or before they became complicated in the public arena also asked questions around the salmon industry, and as been presented by the Minister on behalf of, or by the member here on behalf of the Minister, recently there has been a salmon plan released. It wasn't really a plan, it was sort of like a plan for a plan. It was a little bit like a curious step where for 12 months there was a moratorium. We support this industry, but we're going to sort of shut them down for a little while, and then we're going to have a plan that doesn't really give any clear direction. And I asked the Minister a couple of questions about their expectations of the industry. The Minister has indicated through the plan and across the table at estimates that there's an expectation that the industry go more onshore or further offshore. And so I asked the industry, are keen for clarification, what does more onshore mean? And it took repeated questions to ask, what does that mean? What do you mean? What are you saying to industry when you mean more onshore? Because every company that are actually growing out salmon in Tasmania have an onshore presence. Every company are growing out young fish onshore and then taking them out to sea to complete the process before sale. But the Minister couldn't answer the question. There wasn't an answer to the question. What do you mean? What do you want them to do that they're not doing now? Do you want to do more of something or less than something? And after persistent, multiple questions, it was like, we want the fish to be bigger. Okay, well, if you want the fish to be bigger, how big do you want the companies to grow the fish on land before they can take them to sea? Oh, that's something that we'll talk to the industry about. You have 12 months of a moratorium and then you have all this time to develop a plan. You say you want them to do something, but you don't really know what you mean by that. That doesn't create certainty for industry. That actually impedes investment by industry in order for them to continue to support jobs in rural and regional Tasmania. And so it would be an expectation that those conversations happen in a way that support industry to continue to invest in jobs in regional Tasmania. There were other questions as well around the salmon industry in terms of their flow-through hatcheries and the reasons why they are putting jobs at risk in regional Tasmania with the closure of those flow-through hatcheries. And then after asking questions about salmon, one of an area that's been of deep interest to me over the last 12 months, and I know of great frustration to many fishers over many years, we started asking questions about fisheries. Now, in fisheries, so you have aquaculture, which is salmon, you have fisheries, which is our wild fisheries, and in fisheries there's a really clear position that can be considered by governments and by decision makers about what's the purpose of your fishery in your area. So we've got fish in the sea and we fish them and we sell them to market and people in the process make money, but what's the benefit and the reason that comes back to the state? And you can either have, for instance, at an extreme example, one boat that goes out and catches all the fish and sells it all to market and makes all the money, or you can have lots of boats in fishing ports all around Tasmania, equally, well, not necessarily equally, but all having an opportunity to catch some fish, sell to market, make some money, which means you've got local people in local communities earning money to be able to support local communities. You mean you've got local fishers with their local families who are also supporting and earning money in their local communities. It means you've got local fishers that might have partners or extended family members that might work in other sectors in that community, that might have kids at the local school, that might have kids in the local sports team, that might be coaches in the local sports team. They might be volunteers at the local fire brigade. So by being able to have a commitment and a decision that says we support jobs in communities, not just the efficiency of the fishery, is a really important thing to put your mind to. Now, I asked the Minister about this. I asked, is it the current policy of the government to seek efficiency in our fisheries or to provide for jobs in regional and rural Tasmania? Now, initially the Minister was a bit confused and didn't really understand the question, although it is a question that globally is being discussed, nationally is being discussed, and absolutely locally is being discussed. So the Minister wondered if I was talking about the salmon industry. No, clarification, salmon is aquaculture, fisheries is our wild fisheries. No, we're talking about fisheries, and I asked again, and the Minister went on to talk about the sustainability of fisheries. And it's like, if we say that the baseline of our fisheries in Tasmania is an expectation that it's sustainable, and you've got to question whether this government's ever good at doing that, because, in our wreck fishing there are depleted stocks and depleting stocks which are completely trashing our Tasmanian way of life. But if we've got the sustainable element of our fishery as the baseline, then on top of that we've got a sustainable fishery, then do you want to support jobs lobs, or do you want to support efficiency? Asked the question again. The minister didn't answer, and then finally the minister, not being able to answer that really important question, referred it off to a member of the department. And Dr Dutton absolutely understood the question and was able to provide a response. It is really concerning when you have the minister responsible for an area with such a critical point to be examined, didn't understand the question and then couldn't answer the question. For all of the fishers in Tasmania, whether they be in abalone, whether they be in rock lobster, whether they be in calamari, whatever it is that they're doing, not having the confidence of the minister to know that they're supported to be a local fisher in a local community that is supporting local schools and sporting clubs and local economies, that the minister didn't understand and was unable to answer the question is a real worry. Now, from that, then I went on to ask questions about resources for the department. There's some really big and important work happening at the moment. There's a review of the Living Marine Resources Act, there are the development of harvest strategies, and that all is important to figure out the sustainability of the fishery. And one of the documents that's recently been released talks about a 10-year plan to develop harvest strategies for the different fisheries in Tasmania. Now, if we know we've got a problem in our fisheries where we've got a number of species that are depleted and depleting, and we're trying to develop harvest strategies for the balance of our fisheries, wouldn't you think that that was actually urgent to ensure that we understood that we had sustainable fisheries and that we weren't trending towards being depleted or depleting, and that we would prioritise the work of the harvest strategies? So I asked the Minister about the resourcing in the department to perhaps consider doing those harvest strategies in a more timely way and not wait 10 years for them to be done. Again, the Minister had a little difficulty in answering the question to start with and suggested that it had been funded in a previous budget and it was all okay. My question is, horse and cart matters about fisheries, you're about to review, or you're in the process of reviewing, which is going to take years under the current sort of pace, the Living Marine Resources Act, which is the primary instrument. You've got these harvest strategies that say how you're going to share the resource, but this whole process could take 10 years. That to me seems as though there is an under-resourcing in that area. Another area where there's a real concern with the under-resourcing, but again got deferred off to another area, is with the new rules around fisheries. There's going to be a need to increase the resourcing to our marine police for compliance with the new fisheries rules. I know there has been some action taken in recent times where people have been informed and educated about their responsibilities under the new rules, but if our marine police are not resourced sufficiently to actually do the work to educate and then ensure people comply with the rules, one, there's no point in having them, but two, some really serious things that are occurring in our fisheries that people report aren't being addressed, and that leads to the impact on the sustainability of our stocks. I asked a couple of questions on behalf of one sector to just clarify this point, and again I say to the Minister, if she listens back to this video, that the purpose of these questions is about this question of efficiency or supporting local communities. So in the rock lobster fishery, I asked a question about ruling out multiple night shots. At the moment you're allowed to set your pot once from a particular time of night until the morning, but there has been a concern that perhaps there's a shift in being able to set multiple shots at night. That has been ruled out, and that's a positive thing by the Minister at this point. I also asked whether there was any intention to increase the number of pots or tonnage on individual operators, and again, although there was a significant delay, this was a question that I'd actually asked a lot earlier in the year, that surprisingly the responses came just prior to estimates. I hadn't actually been aware that the answer had been released, but the Minister was able to confirm that there would not be an increase in tonnage or pots, and again, that's actually about supporting local fishers, and so it's important for the Minister to really understand what that means and why those questions are being asked. In the recent rock lobster rules that were formed, there was a particular rule that allowed exemptions to the rules. So although people might remember there was a whole lot of activity around the increasing of 60 pots in certain areas of Tasmania, and that rule didn't eventuate, but there was an exemption contained within the rules, and there was a question asked about whether exemptions had been applied for and any had been issued. There have been 2 applications for exemptions, but the Minister was able to confirm that none of those had been approved. And again, that's really important for the balance of the fishery to understand, because if, for instance, there was a real flurry for applications for an exemption and exemptions were being granted, then that would be a concern, a trending concern in the fishery. The final point that I want to raise in the moments that I have available is the lack of commitment over the last 9 years of this government to address the depleting stocks in our recreational fisheries and in our fisheries. Ultimately, this minister needs to ensure that she starts taking action and is fully aware of her responsibilities as a minister.
Connor, Leader of the Greens.